Once there was not a war, and the war lasted 7 long years. And at the end of those 7 long years, 2 of the soldiers who were brothers left the battleground to go home. Now, one of the brothers was as kind and as good as you could possibly want, but his brother was as mean and wicked as you can imagine. But the fact is, because the mean brother was a thief, he ended up as rich could be, and the poor good man had no more than 2 pennies to rub together. Well, they finally got home, and when they got home, the rich man built and extended his house, and he bought land, and he bought horses and everything he needed, but the poor man returned to his very humble, broken down cottage, which he had with one little field, and he struggled as best he could. But the one thing he did have was friends, and friends bring you riches more than your wildest dreams. But the mean man, he had no friends. Now, one winter's night when the ground was frozen hard, an old woman came to that part of the country. Now, in those times, in those places, the custom is that if a stranger knocked on your door and needed help, you helped them. Now, she went to knock on the door of the rich man, and the rich man flung open his door and said, "What do you want?" And the old woman said, "Well, the thing is, I've come a long way and I'm cold and I'm hungry. Please, could you help me and give me a bed for the night?" "Certainly not," the man said, and slammed the door in her face. She went off without saying a word until she got to the tumble-down cottage of the poor good brother. And she knocked on his door 3 times. And the poor man opened his door and said, "Hello, my poor dear lady, come on in. You must be frozen." And he sat her by the fire and he said, "Look, whatever I have is yours. I'm poor, so all I've got today is cabbage soup and stale bread, but you're welcome to share it." And they ate and they shared the food. And the thing is, if you share food with a friend, it's always a feast, and so it was. And they sat by the fire talking and talking till it got late, and then the woman lay down on a bed by the fire, tucked up with the man's blankets, and had a really comfortable sleep. And in the morning, she got up and she thanked the man, and she stood outside his cottage and she pointed a bony finger towards his field and said, "Plant turnips." And then she was gone without saying another word. And the man listened to her, and with his last 2 pennies bought a great big sack of turnip seed. And he waited until the earth warmed up, and he waited some more until the leaves started to grow again on the trees and the birds started to make nests and lay eggs. And then he prepared his field. He dug and he raked and he picked up all the stones and he weeded until at last the earth was ready to plant the seed. And he sowed the seed, and he waited until the sun shone and the earth got warmer and warmer. And then, one by one, the turnips started to push their way through in the field until one day he looked out and he saw he had a field full of hundreds and hundreds of turnips. Some were small, some were medium, but one of them was growing really, really big. "Oh my goodness," he thought. "I am going to be so lucky when it comes time to dig up my turnip harvest." And eventually the time came to dig up his turnips, and he dug up all the small ones and all the medium ones, but he looked at the enormous turnip in the field. He thought, "Oh my goodness, I'm going to need some help here." So he got all his friends to come with all their tools and sticks and spades and pickaxes, and eventually between them they dug and they dug and they pulled until the enormous turnip was up on the field. "Oh my goodness me," the man said, "what on earth am I going to do with this? I've got plenty of turnips to eat and to sell. What am I going to do with this enormous turnip?" And one of his friends said, "I know, you could give it to the king. It would make a very unusual present." Which it would. "Okay," said the man. So he borrowed a cart and some horses, And he put the enormous turnip onto the cart, and he pulled the cart down the track, through the wood, across the road, into the king's castle. And there was the king standing in front of him and saying, "Oh my goodness, what is this wonderful thing I see? It seems to be a turnip." And the man said, "Well, it is, Your Majesty. I thought it would make an unusual present." Well, the king was delighted, and he said, "Well, it is an unusual present. In fact, I've never been given such an unusual present." "Thank you very much indeed," he said. "Tell me about yourself. Are you rich?" "No," said the man, "I'm really, really poor." "Ah," said the king, "we'll have to see what we can do about that." And he gave the man 3 great big sacks of gold. "Oh my goodness," thought the man, "thank you so much, Your Majesty." And off he went home with these 3 amazing sacks full of gold. And when he got home, he was able to build a bigger house, get some more animals, and help his friends out. Meanwhile, the mean brother, can you begin to imagine how he felt? He was so envious and jealous. It started to eat him up inside like a poisonous plant. And he got really angry, and he said, "If my stupid brother can get 3 sacks of gold for that ridiculous turnip, just imagine what I could get if I gave him everything I owned." So he went home and he got a cart, an enormous cart, and onto the enormous cart he put everything he owned. He put all his knives and forks and spoons, his bottles of wine and bottles of oil. He put his jewellery there. He put his tables and chairs and all his furniture, until all that was left in his house was a broom and some dust. And off he went to the king with this extraordinary cart, towering full of all his possessions. And he went down a path through the wood, along the road, till he got to the king's castle. And the king looked at him and said, "Oh my goodness, I'm astonished," he said, with a look of astonishment. "What on earth is this?" And the man said, "Your Majesty, I've just got a few things for you." And the king was amazed, and he said, "Oh my goodness, thank you awfully. I say, this is very generous. I don't know what to say. You must be incredibly rich if you can spare these things to give away. What can I possibly give to a man who clearly has everything?" And he tugged his beard and he scratched his head, and then suddenly his eyes lit up and he said, "I know," he said, "I've got the perfect present." And he gave the man the turnip.